Okay, now we're being transcribed and recorded. So be on your best behavior, okay? We're going to be starting on page 93.
Thank you, sir.
93. And this is the beginning of section 4, the last section of the book, practices and prompts. So before we dive in, was there anything, last week seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? Oh, that's right, because we didn't meet last week.
All right.
Oh, that's why it seems like such a long time ago. It's been 2 weeks since we were in this. I was thinking this seems like forever. Yeah, yeah. Beth and Brady and Marion and I and Doug and Becky, we were all sitting around a table at Tonto's at this
Yeah.
Yep, yep.
so, and it was
You
pouring down rain.
actually were on 99. That's so
Yeah.
true.
Okay, so it's been 2 weeks now. So we're going to start on 93 and we'll read through the section again and then come back and pick up where we left off. But before we do that, was there anything that's come up over the last couple of weeks that you wanted to lead with? I always like to give Tony a moment to think about it because he normally has something.
Nothing today.
Oh, not even in Portuguese, man.
Not any Portuguese.
Okay. All righty then. Well, let's go ahead and let's dig in here. Gosh, I don't know if I want to read the whole thing again. Should I read the whole thing again? Do we need that? Or do you want me to read the first,
Yes.
the whole thing? Okay. I always do what Judy tells me. So, all right, practices and prompts. When I was a boy, to practice had a negative connotation, evoking images of hours of laborious sitting on the piano bench or shooting hoops. But now, spiritual mentors are offering the discipline of practice as the foundational and necessary work of retraining our minds and our emotions. We need practices to help us realize that our minds and emotions are on cruise control, unconsciously trapped in a repetitive, even obsessive pattern that limits our ability to see or truly understand. Practice is no longer seen as optional, but as a practical necessity if we are to cultivate any fresh or authentic responses. Without it, nothing new is really able to happen. Practice is an essential reset button that we must push many times before we can experience any genuine newness. We might think of it as the familiar Control-Alt-Delete override that many of us use to restart our computers. Without practices that change our responses, we just keep endlessly repeating our culturally trained and already well-practiced survival and control mechanisms. Practices that rewire the brain and the emotions reveal the seeming neuroplasticity of the brain and its amazing capacity for rewiring. Whether we're aware of it or not, we are practicing all the time. When we operate on our habituated patterns, we strengthen certain neural pathways, which makes us, as the saying goes, set in our ways. But when we stop using old neural grooves, these pathways actually die off. Practice can literally create new responses and allow old ones to show themselves. By the same token, not repeating a habitual response can cause it to die off. We humans are all addicted to our own way of thinking and feeling, it seems. It might just be the one universal addiction. It is strange that we have come to understand the importance of practice in sports, in most therapies, in any successful business, and in any creative endeavor. But for some reason, most of us do not see the need for it in the world of religion, where it is probably more important than in any other area. New wine demands fresh skins, or otherwise we lose both the wine and the container, as Jesus put it. Practices more than anything else create a new container for us, one that will protect the new wine we wish to take in. Contemplative practice, or what we once simply called prayer, is God's answer to our addictions, to our habits. A completely different processing system, or thinking cap, as the nuns used to call it. Father Thomas Keating calls various contemplative prayer practices the divine therapy that has been available to all since the beginnings of human consciousness. But most of us now need to be taught this healing form of prayer practice since it no longer comes naturally or is taught wisely or broadly. In fact, the postmodern overstimulated mind is actually anti-contemplative. Practice is important because mere willpower, I will do it, or enforced behavior, you must go to church on Sunday, does not actually change our attitude or interior space. It only creates the kind of passive and passive-aggressive Christianity that is so much the norm today. The old self may temporarily think some new ideas, join a new group, or try some new behaviors, but they, like guilt-based diets, are usually not successful for long or at a deep level. A foundational rewiring, an interchange of actual attitude and conditioning, has to take place for any change to last long term. On a diet, that would mean not just saying, I'm going to eat less, but completely reworking my attitude toward food itself. Otherwise, our preconditioned brains will win every time, and we will see little actual growth or lasting change in ourselves or in our family and friends. Our foundational life responses end up being the same at age 55 as they were at age 25. It is actually discouraging to notice how often this is true, even among seemingly mature people. Many are convinced that rituals and practices like daily Eucharist, the Rosary, processions and pilgrimages, repetitive chants, genuflections and prostrations, physically blessing oneself, which we call the sign of the cross, singing and silence, have operated as a kind of body-based rewiring. But over time, as these practices turned into repetitive obligations, they degenerated, and most people came to understand them magically as divinely required transactions. Instead of inviting people into new consciousness, they often froze people in their first infantile understanding of those rituals, and transactions ended up substituting for transformation. Mindless repetition of any practice with no clear goal or purification of intention can, in fact, keep us quite unconscious. Unless the practices keep breaking us into new insight, desire, compassion, and an ever larger notion of God and ourselves. Catatonic repetition of anything is a recipe for unconsciousness, the opposite of any real consciousness, intentionality, or spiritual maturity. If spirituality is not a very real growth in both inner and outer freedom, it is not authentic spirituality. It is such basic unfreedom that makes so many people dislike and mistrust religious people. Such fear-based spinning of prayer wheels reflects the magical level of consciousness that dominated much of the world until it began to erode in the 1960s. But each of these practices can also be understood in a very mature way, too. Each of the following 12 lifestyle practices and prompts have the potential to break us into deeper consciousness, to reset our mind and heart, and to allow every day to become another encounter with the just this of every moment. By prompts, I mean a bit of guidance or advice that can serve as an entranceway, an invitation into a fruitful time of prayer. Practice can lead to what basketball players, dancers, and musicians call muscle memory. That is, the cultivation of new automatic responses and actions. Every great artist and athlete moves around inside an almost unthinking flow of creativity, precisely because they first practiced and practiced and practiced until their deepest and best flow came to the surface. When it did, it reflected their deepest and truest nature. It's a paradox that God's gifts are totally free and unearned, and yet God does not give them except to people who really want them, choose them, and say yes to them. This is the full symbiotic nature of grace. Divine loving is so pure that it never manipulates, shames, or forces itself on anyone. Love waits to be invited and desired, and only then rushes in.
That's good
Okay.
stuff.
Any initial thoughts, or these would be secondary thoughts since we read this 2 weeks ago? Anything jump out at you that you just want to mention before we start picking it apart?
I liked it better the second reading.
That's good, William. I'm having trouble remembering the first reading, so you're doing really well. There's a lot of good stuff
I
in
know
this
that
section.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I know that I think I listened to the first recording relative to this piece. But it came back to me in this, especially the last the last paragraph, about the paradox of God's gifts being totally free and unearned. I still reacted with a sense of around, but I might need a refresher there.
You were reactive to what part, Judy?
The last paragraph that you just read.
Uh-huh. Was there anything particular about it?
Totally free and unearned, yet God does not give them except to people who really want them, choose them and say yes to them, and doesn't manipulate, shame, or force itself on anyone. But it just struck that chord again of, it contradicts for me at least a little bit still, needing more explanation here.
Yeah.
That he that
Oh, did we lose you, Judy? I think she's
is
frozen.
unstable. So that's the thing that I've been getting.
Yeah,
If you can hear that at all.
you were frozen there for a bit.
You're frozen there, and I think we missed an operative sentence. But yeah. Oh, I think she's frozen again.
Yeah, she's frozen me.
I'm gonna
So
move out of this corner.
okay. So yeah, this was the actually the first thing that we commented on 2 weeks ago as well. And
Yeah.
what we talked about then, at least what I talked about then, was that it's just it's a way that a kind of a misleading way to state it, that God does not give them these gifts except to people who really want them, choose them, and say yes to them. But actually, that's the way that it appears to us. It's kind of like observable astronomy. You know, you look at the heavens from our perch on Earth, and the planets and the stars and everything appear to move in a certain way. They're not really moving that way, but they appear to move that way from our observation point here on Earth. And so from our observation point here on Earth, God sometimes appears to move in certain ways from our perch here. It's not really the way he moves, but it sure appears that way. Why does Jesus say, "My God, why have you abandoned me," from the cross? Why does David say the same thing? Why do we talk about God hardening Pharaoh's heart and then Pharaoh hardening his own heart? And, some of the things that we talk about in terms of the way that we experience God's presence. Sometimes God really showed up tonight. Well, God is not showing up. God is always present everywhere, but it sure feels like God showed up. And in the case of this, the gifts are totally free, and yet it feels like God doesn't give them to us until we're ready to receive them. It feels that way. Now, we know that that's not what's really going on. We talk about this all the time. God never withholds anything. Everything that God has been on the table. God is all poured out. God, it's been on the table since the creation of time. And so it's all there. It's all ours. It's all available, but it's not going to make any difference to us until the moment that we're ready to be able to accept it. The moment that we've cleared the decks enough in order to be able to pick up that gift and run with it. But it does feel like it's being withheld and then given, like a seal getting a fish for a good trick. But that's not really what's happening. But I understand why he says it that way. Is that helping, Judy?
Yes.
Okay.
I think for me too,
Thank you.
counterintuitive the way that it's written, but when I look at that, like in the light of the last line, when it says love waits to be invited and desired and only then rushes in, um, I think about that. I mean, he could have said, instead of God does not give them except to people who really want them, he could have said, and we cannot take them unless we really want them, but we're not taking them. We in the light of like when we love, we can't take the love of another person. Like we have to wait for it to be invited and desired. And so in that sense, like does not give makes more sense than we cannot take. I don't know.
I know what you're driving at, though, Sarah. It makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. Absolutely.
Or,
Yeah.
I interpret it as it's there. The gifts are there. The love is there. It is for me to accept or to choose to receive it. It's always been there.
Mhm.
But I have the choice to ignore it or not pay attention to it and not be aware of it. But then once I'm aware, it is my choice to say, aha, I'll take it. I'll accept that. Thank you.
Exactly. Exactly. And remember, it's not exactly a choice for us not to accept the gift. It's just that we're still Bisha, right? We're still unripe. We're still immature. We're still not ready for prime time. We're just not able to see what we don't see. We can't know what we
Right.
don't know. And so it's just that we haven't gotten to the point where we can start to apprehend these things. And we need more cooking. We need more contemplative
Yeah.
time. We need more life in the rear view, however you want to put it. But it just sometimes it just takes a while.
Mm. It's almost like our seeing and hearing need to be amplified or, kind of pulled to the next level.
Mhm. Exactly. Exactly. And that's what this is all about. That's what contemplative practice is all about. That's what spiritual formation is all about. That's what religion is supposed to be all about. But as he so articulately puts here, is that when those practices that were meant to usher us into this awareness, into this presence, devolve into mere, he calls it magical, I'd like to call it superstitious, but they're just mindless repetitions and rituals, then they don't do their job anymore. And then the whole religion can devolve into a very superficial and very literalistic understanding of spirituality that just doesn't get us beneath the surface. And that's unfortunate. It's basically what happens with every group, unless the group is really focused on running counter to that and maintaining the balance. It's kind of inevitable that it's going to go that way because that's just what happens over time. But all of this is supposed to be geared toward ushering us and funneling us into the type of experiences that will convince us of something deeper and to show us that this degreeless love that Jesus is talking about really does exist and it really is just there. There is no waiting. The kingdom is here. It's now. It's in our midst. It's within. And we can pick it up and run with it anytime we want. And that's a whole different way of approaching life from abundance instead of scarcity, that God never withholds anything. There's nothing to petition God for. He's already poured out. He knows what we need before we ask, and it's already here and available. Very different way of approaching spirituality. And it runs against the grain and is not reinforced by anything around us in society or human physical life. So we're always going to be swimming upstream and having to maintain our own balance as well. We have to keep re-choosing kingdom every moment. We don't just choose it once and it's done for. So that's what the practices are all about. That's what practice is all about. That's why it's a spiritual practice. And he talks about this on page 93, that he didn't like practice as a kid, but now he realizes that it is absolutely essential. And we've realized that it's essential in all these other disciplines, but religion kind of comes up short often, and we need to see that even in spirituality and religion, we're going to need to practice. There is no substitute for it. He says, practice is an essential reset button. We got to push it many times. This is the top of page 94 before we can experience any genuine newness. So like Control Alt Delete, sometimes we got to reset. Got to clear out the RAM memory, clear it all out so we can start from scratch, start from that ground zero, the bottom of the dog pile. And those practices are what are allowing us more and more to create our own automatic responses, to actually change the nature of the way that we perceive the world. Our actual worldview will be changing. Otherwise, we just keep endlessly repeating what we've already learned. We're just repeating our core beliefs that have created the dysfunction in the first place. And we're getting more and more entrenched there, but we're not learning anything new. So rewiring the brain, rewiring the emotions is what's actually happening as we consistently do this. And that gets us to the bottom of 94. And this is going to be new territory for us. We ended in that second paragraph. We humans are all addicted to our own way of thinking and feeling, it seems. It might just be the one universal addiction. So now we come into, it's strange that we've come to understand the importance of practice in sports and therapies and business and creative endeavors. But for some reason, most of us don't see the need for it in the world of religion, where it is probably more important than any other area. And this is something that you run across a lot in spirituality and religion, and sometimes in creative practices as well, art and writing and so on and so forth. This idea that if you create a structure, right? If you start to practice something and discipline yourself to it, that somehow you're killing the spirit, that somehow you're killing the creativity. Have you ever heard that before? That idea that it's supposed to be free, it's supposed to be flowing. We're just supposed to fall into it. If we turn it into a discipline, if we turn it into a practice, then we're killing it. Anybody feeling that way? Feeling that maybe it shouldn't be this kind of structured endeavor? No? Okay, well then you're all at the head of the class.
Doesn't that go to the no pain, no gain thing? I mean, if you have to really sometimes struggle if you're trying to do a new workout routine or something, it's painful and it hurts in the beginning. And then, and I think I read somewhere too that you have to practice something for a period of 21 days, or is it 21 days or something before you, is that what it is? Yeah.
Creating a new habit, Kathy?
To really create a new habit, sticking with it, kind of a stick with it. Ness. I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I know that, especially when I entered the evangelical church, all those decades and years ago, there was this sense that, and it's this sense of more passive Christianity, which I'm always railing against. You all know that, that all we have to do is just come under the covering and come into the fold, and it's just like we're new creatures. We come out of the waters of baptism a new creature, as if there's just nothing for us to do except go through the ritual, and then magically, I'd say superstitiously, everything changes, and now we're new creatures. And to try to actually work on it, as Paul talks about working out your salvation, that's somehow antithetical to the process, or showing a faithlessness that this has already taken place. But nothing could be further from the truth. Like you're saying, Kathy, it's going to take practice. Whatever the strength of our conversion experience, whatever the strength of our peak moment or experience, mystical or otherwise, that will not last unless it is reinforced. Unfortunately, as we said, we're going to be working out our spirituality through our physicality as long as we're breathing here. So we can't get away from the neuroplasticity of the brain. We can't get away from the way that our neurons fire and the circuits that are built there over time. We're not going to get away from that. And so even though we may have had a peak experience, a faith-filled experience, and been shown something of the other side, kind of like Brady's death experience, you know, even that is not going to change him if he doesn't back it up day by day. And Brady has told us that before, and he'll tell you again if you ask him. This is the way we humans work. God knows this. He built us, all right? No surprise there. But this is the way it works. We do have to keep coming back, keep showing up, keep pressing the reset button, coming back to the practice of this until it really becomes part of us, who we are. The ancient Jews said that you have to have the law written on your heart. Same way of saying a different way of saying the same thing. You know, you don't just learn the law. You don't just obey the law. You live with it until it seeps in and replaces your DNA, so to speak. And that's just the way it works.
I was thinking of the analogy, like, the Olympic figure skaters. It's a 3-minute program, but the hours, hundreds of hours of practice until it becomes, you become the dance. And that when you perform, you just perform. You don't even think about it. And you just, the beauty of it is like, you can see that person is in that zone. You just do it. And I think that's what it means too. There comes a point where you just do it. It's part of you. It's part of your existence.
Perfect. Exactly. It needs to become part of who we are so that we don't think about it. If you're thinking about it, then you're not present, right? I mean, just take it to the bank. If you're thinking about something, you're not present to it. You're looking at it from a distance, but you're not present to it. The only time we're truly present is when that apparatus is switched off and we're not thinking through it anymore. And so whatever you're doing, whether you're gardening or writing or basketball or whatever, prayer, if we're thinking about it, we're not really present to it. We're still working out the kinks. We're still working out the mechanics. And so to Kathy's point, you got to put in your 10,000 hours. You got to put in your 21 days. There's always a different date, time frame for when you can start a new habit, right? Nobody really agrees on that. But whatever it is, it's a real period. And until we've done enough of that, and it's going to vary with different people, then we can't really do something without thinking about it. It's not ours yet. And that's where we want to get with our practice of presence. We're not thinking about it anymore. We don't have to think about it anymore. We don't have to think about the law. We don't have to think about theology or doctrine. I love that quote from Chuang Tzu, the ancient Chinese Taoist, where he says that the purpose of a rabbit trap is to catch a rabbit, and once the rabbit is caught, the trap is forgotten. Purpose of a fish snare is to catch a fish, and once the fish is caught, the snare is forgotten. Purpose of words is to convey ideas. Once the ideas are grasped, the words can be forgotten. Show me a person who has forgotten words. That's the one I want to talk to. That's it. You see? We want to have this so far underneath our skin that we don't need the theology and doctrine anymore. We don't need the rituals anymore. We don't need to think about it anymore. That's why Brother Lawrence got to the point where he quit all forms of religious practice except the ones that he was obligated to do under the rule of his house, because he didn't need them anymore. He didn't go to his spiritual director anymore. He didn't need the spiritual director anymore. So he was like one of those Phoenix desert critters that gets all the water they need from the food that they eat. It's like that. So that's what we're after. And that's why just spending the time in whatever way you do is essential, and there is no way around it. And Jesus alludes to it in his typically poetic way when he says, hey, here's the sheepfold. Anybody who's climbing over the fence is a thief and a robber. The only ones that are legit are the ones who are actually going through the door. And by the way, I'm the door. I'm the gate of the sheepfold. And so they all understood what he meant by that, because that's what shepherds did. They built the enclosure and they slept in the opening, and the sheep wouldn't step over the shepherd. But that's the same idea here. There is no shortcut. You're going to have to go through this process. There's no way around it. If you want to go where Jesus is going. So contemplative practice, or what we once simply called prayer. So yeah, we call it contemplative practice, but in the beginning, it was just prayer. That was the only prayer there was. There wasn't the kind of prayer necessarily that we understand. Is God's answer to our addictions and our addictions to our habits. A completely different processing system, or thinking cap, as the nuns used to call it. So we're addicted to our habits. And our habits are those core beliefs. Our habits are the emotional programs that Keating talks about, that were built up early in childhood as a reaction to the traumas and the difficulties that we faced back then. The way that we survived through those periods just carry on with us, and they just keep running their programs. And they're unconscious, so we don't even know that they're running. We're just acting in repeatable ways, and we don't really know why. Like Paul said, I don't know why I do the things I don't want to do, and I don't do the things I want to do. He's talking about this same phenomena. So we do need a different processing system, or a thinking cap, or whatever you want to understand it as. And Keating calls various contemplative prayer practices divine therapy. I realized as I went through contemplative practice, when people were telling me that I really needed to go see a shrink, go see a therapist, which I didn't do, and I kind of wish I had, because the two would have worked really well hand in glove. But contemplation can take us to the same place that the therapist's couch, quote unquote, would take us. It's the same process. It's just self-initiated. You don't necessarily have a guide. And so it's fraught with more peril and may take you longer, like it did for me. But it still is divine therapy. It's still taking you back to the beginning so that you can unravel all the programs that are running in the background that you don't even know about, and then be able to purge them and get clear again. And that divine therapy, he says, has been available to all since the beginning of human consciousness. But most of us now need to be taught all over again this healing form of prayer, because it doesn't come natural, and it isn't taught anymore wisely or broadly. And even more important, our culture has moved in such a way that our culture is completely antithetical to the practice of contemplation. What we were talking about was that's just this last Sunday, I think. We were talking about the 4 S's: silence, solitude, stillness, and simplicity. And what does our culture produce? But noise and crowds and complexity and movement. And those things are important. We need community, and we need crowds, we need people, and we're just naturally noisy, right? But we need the balance between the two of them. But if you go back into ancient cultures, in fact, I think Marion and I were just having this conversation. Someone was, oh no, it was last night, and someone had just watched Pride and Prejudice. Was that you, Kathy? You watched Pride and Prejudice, and you said, hey, these people at night, I mean, all they had was a candle that they walked around from room to room with. There was no lighting. There was nothing electronic at all. All they had was a book that they could read, or someone would play a musical instrument, or they'd just sit there and stare at the wall. But life was lived in such a different way. And if you go all the way back to the ancients, where there weren't even lights of any kind, every night you had this fireworks display that we call stars that we can't even see anymore. And things just opened up naturally within the culture into silence, solitude, stillness, and simplicity in a way that we do not experience at all. And so we are constantly swimming upstream and battling the current of our culture in order to be able to find these contemplative spaces. So it's not just that our churches don't seem to value it anymore, and it's not being taught anymore. It's that our culture doesn't reflect it anymore at all. And so, yes, we need to be re-educated. We need to find the value in the 4 S's again, in contemplative practice again, before we'll ever, exert the effort needed to practice it enough that we can actually turn a corner with this. In fact, the postmodern overstimulated mind is actually anti-contemplative. Absolutely it is. We've talked over and over, I have, about shepherd consciousness, I've talked about it in terms of Moses when he spends 40 years in the backwater of the Midian with Jethro and the tribes out there. And you figure he's a shepherd. What do shepherds do? But they follow their flocks into just the back of beyond, into the wilderness. And they're just with the sheep in the quiet, in the solitude for weeks on end, months on end. And spending that kind of time develops a different kind of consciousness. It has to. So, where in the world do we go to be able to experience that kind of extended time alone and in silence? Well, there really isn't much. So, we have to carve it out. We have to create our little spaces, don't we? And keep showing up to it. Practice is important because mere willpower or enforced behavior does not actually change our attitude or interior space. It only creates a kind of passive and passive-aggressive Christianity that is so much more the norm today. Now, that's an interesting statement. Okay, so willpower and enforced behavior doesn't change our attitude or interior space, but it does create a passive and passive-aggressive approach to our church and faith, to Christianity. Does anybody agree, disagree, want to tell us what does he mean by passive-aggressive Christianity, especially? What's he talking about?
I don't know about, I got to think about the passive aggressive element, but certainly there are many people who call themselves Christian. The way the sheriff says he's a sheriff because he wears a badge. And passively they go to church on Sunday morning, and maybe they're one of the greeters at the church and welcome the people there. And they always go to services during the holidays, and they have their kids say a prayer before dinner. But they're not followers. They're not living the way Christ asked us to live.
So, like he's saying, they're following all the forms, right? They're using the right vocabulary. They're doing all the things that they're supposed to do. So enforced behavior and willpower. But is anything getting changed inside? Is anything in the unconscious getting changed? Is it really being written on their heart? That's the passivity of it. Because we can do all that. We can just obey in a really a passive way. It really isn't the active inside out transformation that we're talking about that costs us everything. That's the thing about this transformation. It costs us everything. Everything that we think about of ourselves and the way the world works, everything has to be called into question. It really is a complete upheaval. Now, it doesn't mean that all those things are going to stay gone. A lot of them do come back. But if you're not willing to sell them, if you're not really willing to dig all the way to the bottom of the aquarium and pull that stuff up, then you're going to be in a passive sort of state. And this passive aggressive, to me, I had to think about it a while too. It's just like, it was really interesting. When you think about what does passive aggressive mean? Well, you're passive aggressive, first of all, if you're kind of conflict avoidant, right? But it's the indirect expression of negative feelings rather than direct ones. So we're avoiding the actual engagement, but we're expressing our anxiety, we're expressing our distress indirectly. So that's passive aggression. But if you think about it in the spiritual sense, it really kind of dovetails off of what Brady and what Rohr are actually saying here. If we're not willing to actually engage our spirituality, then it's going to come out sideways in indirect ways. I think it's really akin to the idea of spiritual bypassing, where you use, spiritual jargon and spiritual platitudes or even, spiritual principles in such a way that you can avoid the deeper work that needs to be done. Again, it's kind of skittering over the surface and feeling that you can just leapfrog because this ritual has been passed, or this platitude has been reached, but we're really not doing the deeper work. And so I think that's what he's probably talking about with passive aggression. And yet, for so many of us, there's still that deeper sense that something's not quite right. It's not all there yet. There's that unconvinced part of us, that unsettled part of us, because we haven't experienced the actual degreeless love of God yet. We're still coming at it secondhand, and that's never going to be enough. And I think that anxiety, that distress, comes out sideways in over defense of the faith and all sorts of unpleasant ways that could be termed as passive aggressive, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of this episode in Seinfeld where they were doing an AIDS march and they're handing out these pins or ribbons and you have to wear it. So there's this guy who was in the march. He was the one what you call deep engagement. He was the one who cared for the patients, who cared for the AIDS friends, and was part of the community. So he's part of the march too, but he refuses to wear the pin. Right? So now here are the people around him, why jeering at him? Why don't you want to wear the pin? No, the pin. This is the pin. In the parade, you wear the pin. That's what it means. Right? It's what Brady means when you say, oh yeah, you go through the rituals, you go through these, but those are superficial. But this guy who doesn't want to wear the pin, he did the work. He was deeply engaged. That's the difference. And when I saw that, yeah, I thought it was, oh, how funny, but that this is what it means.
I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, that was a great writer. Now I see it.
Such a good analogy.
So the point he's making, obviously, is that we've got to actually engage. We're going to have to. Remember we were talking about doubting Thomas 2 weeks ago? Doubting Thomas is our hero. And his real name was Judas, right? Thomas just means twin. Didymus means twin. But he was the bold one. He was the courageous one. He was the one who said, I need a personal experience. You just telling me about this is not going to do it for me. He was the only one who was honest enough, and self-aware enough to say so. Everybody else was doubting, but they didn't say so. But Thomas does. I need a personal experience. He's like our original contemplative in the 12 apostles. I need a personal experience. I've got to put my hands in the wounds. For us, that's metaphorical. For him, not so much. But the point is, he knew that he needed that, and every one of us does. Nobody recognized Jesus until after they had a personal experience with him. That's just the way it works, and it's going to work the same way with us. And it's the same thing that Rohr is saying here. We're going to need a personal experience, and the only way we're going to get it is if we practice contemplative prayer enough and contemplative living enough that we get good at stepping away from everything that blocks us from that experience, which is our own noggins, right? We got to get good at that. And as we repeat that process over and over again, more and more, little by little, we become convinced of this degreeless love. We get it under our fingers. We don't have to think about it anymore. And then it really becomes the operative part of our life. But there is no substitute for that. Nothing else will do. And if we try to paper it over with Christian bumper stickers, we're going to come out sideways in some sort of passive aggression. We're going to be passive about our faith. We're going to be defensive because we know there's that sense of being a fraud somewhere at the center of it all, that we don't know this. Once life kicks away that sense of certainty that we have the luxury of having as a new convert, then we're going to have to deal with this stuff one way or another. And of course, a lot of people just make the walls thicker. They go back and double down. But if we're willing to move forward through that third stage of spiritual growth, we really can break through into something deeper. And that's what this is all about. That's what contemplation is all about. He says the old self may temporarily think some new ideas, join a new group, or try some new behaviors, but they, like guilt-based diets, are usually not successful for long or at a deep level. A foundational rewiring, an inner change of attitude and conditioning has to take place for any change to last long term. That's it. Everything we've been saying for the last 10 minutes, you know. On a diet, that would not mean just saying I'm going to eat less, but completely reworking my attitude toward food itself. Otherwise, and this is a great line, our preconditioned brains will win every time. Our preconditioned brains will win every time, and we will see little actual growth or lasting change in ourselves or in our family or our friends. Why is that? Why will our preconditioned minds win every time?
Well, if we're talking about neuroplasticity and things of that nature, it's just hardwired into the
Mhm.
habit grooves in the brain, basically.
Sure.
And the whole idea of dropping into this contemplative place is so we can loosen up those knots that were previously tied, basically. And the only thing he said that I disagreed with earlier is this idea that those old grooves completely die off. Uh, I think, I think the old grooves seem to have a memory that lingers in there, but we can still, as soon as we relax our attention, I think the old grooves are always calling us back home.
Oh, you're such a pessimist.
I think there's a possibility to get to a stage where, the old grooves are there, the old memories are there, the old story that you were living is there, but there's a time when you can just remember it and not relive it.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like getting past PTSD, right? You
Mhm.
know, once you get past PTSD, you still remember the traumatic event, but it doesn't have the emotional punch anymore. It doesn't bring you back right to the complete experience of the initial event. You can remember it the way you remember any memory, but it doesn't bring you back that way. And that's the way I would kind of liken it. Yes, but I think to the extent that you're right, William, and I agree with you, is that things that you think that you had put down years ago, you get just the right trigger or combination of triggers, and man, it's just right back in your face again. But
Mhm.
here's the difference. Now you know what to do with it,
Mhm.
and your recovery time is much shorter. Or you can notice it and just marvel that it's still there, right? And kind of laugh at yourself, but you don't have to act on it. You have a new groove that you can run through. But yeah, it's amazing how that stuff does lurk in the background. And I think that's again why the preconditioned mind always wins. It doesn't play fair. It
Mhm.
doesn't play fair in the sense that it's flying under the radar of our consciousness. It's down there in the unconscious, operating away at a level that we can't even access through our conscious willpower. And so we don't even know what we're fighting. We don't know why we're fighting what we're fighting. And so it's not anything that we have any direct control over. And the only way we can get to it is through these repeated processes that we do that brings that stuff up, whether it's therapeutic or whether it's contemplative. We have to go through the process to bring that stuff up to a place where then we can CBT it away, right? We can actually practice against it, but it has to get up into the consciousness so we know what we're dealing with.
Mhm.
And that just takes time.
Eckhart, Eckhart Tolle tells a story or he offers a quote that I think is a great example of this. And in this talk, Eckhart Tolle said, the Buddha said, if you think you're enlightened, spend a weekend with your parents.
Mhm.
And it's just like this stuff, it's still there.
Our
Oh,
kids wouldn't say that. Oh,
No, no,
none
no,
of
they
that.
wouldn't.
Of
No.
course not.
Of course not.
Especially because we're so enlightened.
Yeah, right.
I think we've all experienced walking into our parents' house and becoming 8 years old again. I mean, how do you not? It's just amazing how those roles just reassert themselves, isn't it?
Mm,
Especially if there's any pressure on you. My
Yeah.
mm,
gosh. So
mm,
to that extent, we're behind you, William.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Plus, being in the room I grew up in, like something about those triggers, like memories recorded in the walls, you know what I mean? Like
Oh,
you're totally right about that if you think you're enlightened, try spending time with your parents. Uh, mm,
So our foundational life responses end up being the same at age 55 as they were at 25 if we don't do these practical measures, if we don't practice what we're talking about, if we think we can just think our way through it, just read it out of a book, understand the concepts, and then we're done. Wouldn't that be nice? Bloodless, antiseptic, sterile, at a distance. I would love it. That's the way my mind works. And that's what I tried to do for years and hoping that I could do it by sheer force of will. It doesn't work. It is actually discouraging to notice how often this is true, even among seemingly mature people. You know, you'd like to think that we get wiser as we get older. Sometimes we just get older, but not if we understand this principle and we're willing to show up. That's what it's all about. We have to keep showing up.
Like beginnings and ends, and we like going around things, but not always going through things. And um, I think being able to see patterns is a naturally intuitive thing that our brains do, as long as we're open to seeing new patterns. Then we can continue to practice those. But it's like, to me, it's ironic because there's this whole concept of like even embedded within religious organizations, the fundamental religious organization, a lot of times this concept of perfectionism and um, perfectionism itself being this neuronal groove that we've created, but it's really just this need for control and really one of the greatest downfalls of mankind. You know.
mhm.
Absolutely. So we really need to be honest with ourselves and whether we're practicing this stuff or if we're just learning about it. And there's a huge difference. And so, what we're doing here is we're learning about it, we're talking about it, we're sharing our experiences and so on and so forth. But in our own lives, when nobody is looking, when nobody's going to reward us for it, and once we realize that nobody cares, are we still going to show up? And that's going to make the difference. If we're willing to show up on our own when nobody's watching and nobody cares, because it's not for anybody else we do this. It's so like trying to recover from addiction. You can't do it for anybody else. You do it because you're sick and tired of being sick and tired and you want to live a different way. And when, the pain gets to a certain level and it overcomes the fear, you can actually do something different. And that's what it takes in each one of us. So it really is, as Rohr is saying here, overcoming the addiction to our habits, to our habitual way of thinking, to the worldview that we have inherited from our childhood, and all those programs running down there in the unconscious. That's what we're addicted to. And the process is just going to be like recovery. And so are we willing to do it? It's hard. It requires everything. There is a withdrawal period. We're going to have to detox. I mean, you can really take this analogy as far as you want, but that is the process. And if we are willing to go through it, though, things open up that we just can't imagine. All right. We're going to save the last 2.5 pages for next week, and then we'll get into the 12 prompts. We're actually getting to the end of this book, so we got to start thinking about the next book. What's next after this? The floor is open, not right now, for suggestions. So keep thinking about it. All right. Any last burning desires before we turn it over to Scotland? Really, Ellen, you don't have one? Not a joke or anything? I'm just shocked. Shocked. Okay. Go ahead, Scotty.
Father God, we're so grateful to be here with you and spending time with each other and exploring things that we can take in and learn and form new grooves and have our life expand and become more filled with grace and love and experiences that keep our life worth living and keep us in that state of joy. We appreciate everything that you have set up for us, Lord, and we want to come rushing in to that room and let it be known that we're here, we're staying, and we're believing in our God, and what He says is true. And because of that, we find peace in our life and direction. So we're grateful, Lord. We thank you, we praise you, and we glorify your holy name, Lord Jesus. It's your name that we pray in and say our amens. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, everyone. All right. We'll see you
got
on
it, guys.
Monday.
Right.
Hey, boys and girls.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, guys.
Good night, guys.
Bye,
Good night,
Sarah.
Scotty. Good night, George.
Good night.
I don't know if George is there.
Good night, George.
George is gone. George is frozen, unfortunately. So is Judy. Judy's frozen too.
Yeah.
Look at you got frozen people here.
I'll play Frozen.
Yeah, Jordana's still alive. Good night, Jordana.
Yes. I'll see you on Sunday.
See you on Sunday, dear. Okay.
All right,
bye.
See you guys.